Story 1. So I grew up in a tiny place called Red Hollow, Montana. If you've never heard of it, that's normal. We're not famous for anything, unless you count the fact that the only landmark with a sign is a rusted water tower that still has a bullet hole through the O. It's the kind of town where you can stand in the middle of the highway at night and hear nothing but wind and a dog barking a mile away. I was raised by my mom, and she wasn't strict about much. Curfews were flexible. Grades were, try your best. But there was one rule she drilled into me like it was the only law that mattered: never go near the trailer by the gravel pit. She never called it the trailer. She called it his place. And she never said his full name, just Walt, like saying the rest might invite something into the room. Walt's trailer sat beyond the last mailbox on the edge of town, past a line of scrub trees, where the gravel pit had carved a shallow crater into the earth. People said he made his living digging through trash, fixing broken appliances, and selling whatever still worked. The thing everyone remembered most was that he only did it at night. He'd roll through alleys and behind stores like a shadow, and if you caught him in your headlights, he'd freeze, stare, and then vanish behind a dumpster like he'd been built for it. I grew up hearing two versions of him. The kids talked about him like he was the boogeyman. The adults talked about him like he was complicated. You'd hear, "That man's dangerous," in the same tone as, "That man's sick," and sometimes in the same sentence. There were rumors that decades earlier he'd done something and gotten away with it. Nobody said exactly what in front of kids. But everyone acted like they knew. When I was 14, my best friend's mom gave us a ride home from the river, and my friend made a joke about Walt kidnapping people. His mom's face changed instantly, like she'd put on a mask. She said, very calmly, "You boys stay away from that trailer." Then, half a second later, she softened and added, almost like she felt bad, "He just wants to be left alone." The switch was so weird it stuck with me for years. By the time I was 17, my curiosity had turned into something sharper. Not just fear, anger. Because one night I came home and found my mom sitting on the floor with a shoebox of old photos, her cheeks wet, the TV muted. She wasn't drunk, but she had that unguarded look people get when the past stops being a story and starts being a place they're standing in again. She told me what happened the summer after she graduated. Her friend, Evan, had been out near the gravel pit with a few others. He wandered off to pee in the bushes, and that's when he saw someone moving in the dark with what looked like a small person slumped over their shoulder. Evan yelled. The figure ran. Evan and his buddies chased. When they caught up, the person dropped the small body, turned, and fired. Evan didn't make it. My mom said that small body was a girl from town. She was rushed to the hospital, but she didn't survive either. And everyone said it was Walt. They said they saw his truck. They said they knew his voice. They said they knew. And then, nothing. No arrest. No trial. Just Walt and his trailer at the edge of everything, and a town that learned to swallow questions. After my mom told me that, the hatred I felt wasn't rational. It was simple. It was hot. It demanded a shape. And after a few weeks of thinking about it too much, I decided I was going to do something about it. My plan was as dumb as it sounds now. I told myself I was going to scare him. Make him move. Make him feel, for one night, what my mom had felt for years. I didn't have money, so I stole a can of paint thinner from the school art room and waited for a Friday when my friends were at the usual bonfire spot. I said I was going home. Instead, I walked toward the gravel pit. It took almost an hour to get there in the dark, hugging the edge of the water and keeping my light off. When I finally saw the trailer, there was a dim glow in one window and the flicker of a TV. I watched for nearly 40 minutes, shivering and rehearsing my courage. Then the TV went quiet. The light clicked off. The trailer became just a shape in the dark. I waited a little longer. Then I crept closer with the can in my hand, heart pounding so hard it felt like it was pushing on my throat from the inside. I was 3 steps from the trailer when I heard a sound to my right, sharp and mechanical. A click you don't forget once you've heard it. A voice said, not loudly, but clearly, "What's that you got there?" My whole body locked. I couldn't even turn my head. I knew it was him. I knew this was the moment every warning in my life had been trying to prevent. "Drop it," he said. My fingers loosened and the can hit the dirt with a dull thud. A small flashlight beam slid over it. Then the beam rose to my face. "Turn around," he said, and there was something in his tone that wasn't anger. It was recognition. I turned, slowly, expecting to see the muzzle of a gun and the end of my story. Instead, when he got a good look at me, he actually recoiled. Like I'd slapped him. He lowered the gun. He stared for a long, quiet moment. Then he said my name. Not boy. Not kid. My name. I felt my blood go cold in a completely different way. "How do you?" I started, and my voice cracked so badly I sounded younger than I was. He swallowed, glanced over his shoulder at the dark trailer, then back at me. "Come inside," he said. "If you're gonna do something stupid, you might as well hear the truth first." The inside smelled like oil and old wood. It was warmer than I expected. Messy, but not the way people described. Tools were organized. A kettle sat on a hot plate. The walls were lined with newspaper clippings, but not like a conspiracy wall, more like someone collecting proof of something they couldn't explain. He sat across from me and asked what my mom told me. So I told him. Every part. The lake. The girl. Evan. The shots. He didn't interrupt. He didn't defend himself. He just listened like a man hearing a story he'd already lived. When I finished, he leaned back and exhaled slowly. "Okay," he said. "Here's what actually happened." And what he told me made my stomach twist. He said Evan wasn't chasing a kidnapper. Evan was chasing someone from his own group. That small body wasn't being carried by a stranger. It was being dragged by a boy my mom used to party with. And the girl was already gone before Walt ever saw her. Walt said he'd been out near the gravel pit hunting rabbits. He saw drunk teenagers moving through the brush, heard them laughing, heard them arguing about what to do next like it was a game. Then he saw the girl. He flashed his light. He shouted. The boy with the girl pulled something shiny, something that wasn't a gun, but was close enough to make a promise. Walt fired. He said Evan took the bullets meant for someone else because Evan was closer, because Evan was loud, because Evan was brave in the dumb way drunk teenagers can be. Walt said he dragged the girl toward town, but by the time he reached the old gas station, the clerk was already calling for help. Walt didn't stay. He didn't want to be the man holding a girl no one could save. Then he looked at me with a kind of tired disgust I didn't understand yet. "The reason I got away with it," he said, "is because people didn't want the real story." He told me the town needed a monster that lived in a trailer. Something simple. Something to point at. Something that kept other names clean. "And your mom," he said quietly. "Your mom knows exactly what happened." I felt my throat tighten. "No," I said automatically, because some part of me still needed my mom to be innocent in the way moms are supposed to be. Walt nodded like he'd expected that. "Go home," he said. "Tell her what I told you. Then look her in the eye and ask her if she's sure she wants you to keep hating me." I left the trailer like I was walking out of a different life. The walk home felt longer. The wind sounded louder. Every shadow looked like it had a face. When I got home, my mom was asleep on the couch. I woke her up and repeated Walt's version as calmly as I could. At first she stared at me like I was speaking another language. Then her expression broke. Not into anger. Into something worse. Something like fear that had been waiting a long time for a knock at the door. She didn't deny it. Not directly. She just whispered, "You shouldn't have gone there." That was all it took. Because if Walt had been lying, she would have exploded. She would have called him insane. She would have grabbed her keys and driven straight to the sheriff. Instead, she looked like a person caught in a room with no exits. I moved out within a year. I told people it was for work. For school. For a fresh start. But the truth is, I couldn't stand living in a town where everyone agreed on the same story, not because it was true, but because it was easy. And here's the part one still don't like admitting out loud. A few months after I left, I got a call from my friend back home. He said Walt's trailer burned down in the night. They never found his body. And when I asked my friend what people were saying, he went quiet for a second and then said, "They're saying, he finally disappeared like he always wanted." But if that were true, you'd think the gravel pit would feel less heavy when I remember it. It doesn't. Because I still think about how Walt knew I'd show up eventually. Like he'd been waiting. Not for revenge. For someone to finally bring the story back to the people who'd worked so hard to bury it. Story 2. Back in 2006, my girlfriend and I were driving through Nebraska on the way to meet her aunt. It was one of those endless stretches of road where the horizon looks painted on and the radio stations fade in and out like they're breathing. Around midday, the fields changed. It wasn't gradual. It was like the world flipped. 1 second we were surrounded by tall green corn, and the next it was black, miles and miles of scorched earth. Charcoal stalks. Gray dust. The kind of landscape that looks quiet in a way that feels wrong. My girlfriend said farmers sometimes burn fields to reset them. She said it like she was trying to calm herself down, because the sight of it had made her sit up straighter in her seat. That's when I saw them. A man and a little boy, walking hand in hand through the burned field. From a distance it looked almost sweet, like a grandfather showing his grandson the aftermath of a fire. The little boy's shirt looked pale blue against all that black, and his hair was so light it almost glowed. They were heading towards something in the field, an old stone ring that looked like a well. I didn't say anything at first. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't want to be the person who turns a normal drive into a panic over something I thought I saw. But as we got closer, my stomach tightened. Because the man wasn't leading the boy around the well. He was leading him to it. And right as we passed them, close enough to see the man's overalls and the boy's white sneakers, the man lifted the boy like he weighed nothing. And dropped him into the well. My girlfriend screamed so sharply my hands jerked on the wheel. I hit the brakes out of reflex, then immediately kept driving because the thought of stopping in that burned field felt like stepping into a trap. What happened? She kept asking, half crying, half yelling, searching her bag for her phone. No signal. 0 bars. The next town was only a few miles ahead. We sped there and pulled into a diner with a cracked sign and dusty windows. My girlfriend ran inside like the building itself was safety. She begged to use the phone. The woman behind the counter handed it over without questions. While she called 911, the entire diner listened. When she said, "A man threw a kid down a well," the room went silent in a way I still remember. Not shocked silence. Not confused silence. A different kind. Like people recognizing a sentence they didn't want to hear. A man stood up from his booth and asked which field. Another asked what the man looked like. My girlfriend described him: overalls, thinning dark hair, a certain shape to his nose. The diners' faces shifted. Someone said a name, and suddenly it seemed like everyone agreed on it. They weren't saying, "No way." They were saying, "That doesn't make sense." The difference matters. A deputy arrived first. Then the sheriff. We repeated everything. My girlfriend begged them to take her back to the well immediately. The sheriff said he couldn't just go marching onto someone's land without a warrant. My girlfriend started shaking with frustration. "That kid is down there," she said. "Hill." The sheriff cut her off gently, like you cut off someone who's spiraling. He told a deputy to drive out and check the area near the well. While we waited, the whole diner hovered like a single organism pretending not to stare. Then the sheriff got a message over his radio and walked toward us with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good news," he said. "The well is empty. And the man you described is on his way here with his grandson, so you can see everything's fine." My girlfriend went pale. "Empty?" she repeated. "How do you know?" The sheriff explained it like she was a child. Optical illusion. Speed. Smoke in the air. The mind filling in gaps. And the more he talked, the more I felt something sour settle in my gut. Because nobody was acting like a child had almost died. They were acting like a rumor had to be handled. A truck pulled into the lot, old, dented, slow. A big man stepped out in overalls, thinning dark hair, and a face that looked like a lot of faces in rural towns. He walked straight up to us with the anger of a man protecting his reputation. "Who's saying I threw my grandson down a well?" he demanded. The sheriff tried to calm him. The man opened his passenger door and helped a little boy out. "This is him," the man said, shoving the boy gently forward. "This the kid I supposedly killed." My girlfriend stared at the boy. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "That's not him." The boy in front of us had dark hair cut close to his scalp. The boy she saw had pale blonde curls that caught the light. My girlfriend said it again, louder. "That's not the same child." The deputy suggested maybe the sun had made the hair look lighter. My girlfriend looked at him like he'd insulted her intelligence. Then the sheriff pulled me aside. He asked me, quietly, if my girlfriend was okay. Not if she was traumatized. Not if she needed help. If she was okay in the way you mean, stable. And when I said yes, the sheriff's face hardened. He came back and told us to leave town. "Now," he said. "Before you get arrested for causing a disturbance." My girlfriend was so furious she was shaking, but I could see something else behind it, fear. The kind of fear you feel when you realize everyone around you has agreed to the same lie. We left. The second we got reception, she called state police. She reported everything: the burned fields, the well, the diner, the sheriff's behavior. She filed complaints. She insisted. Every time, the answer came back the same. No evidence. No report. Nothing to investigate. And here's why I still think about that day. It's not because of the well. It's because of the boy. The boy with dark hair never spoke. Not once. Not when the man called him grandson. Not when my girlfriend insisted he wasn't the right kid. Not even when she leaned down and said softly, "Are you okay?" He just stared straight ahead with a blank, exhausted expression. Like he'd been trained to be quiet. Like he'd learned the cost of making noise. Years later, out of curiosity, I searched online for missing children cases in that area around that time. I didn't find what I expected. What I found was a series of tiny local posts, old forum threads and archived notices, about a child who went missing after a. The photo was low quality, but the hair was unmistakable. Light. Curly. Almost white. And the comments under the post weren't begging for help. They were arguing about whether the family should stop making a scene. Story 3. My mother's heritage mattered to her in the way some people treat it like a hobby and others treat it like gravity. She was Chilean, and my childhood was full of food, music, and stories that made the world feel wider than my small apartment ever was. We visited once when I was a kid, but as an adult I decided to go back alone. Late 20s, first real solo trip, that kind of thing. I rented a little car and drove out toward a rural town where some relatives lived. The road was empty, the scenery changing slowly from city edges to hills and scattered farms. I was following directions on my phone when flashing lights appeared in my rearview mirror. Police. I pulled over immediately, hands visible, heart thumping. I'd dealt with traffic stops before, but not outside my country. The officer didn't approach like he was checking a license. He parked behind me, stayed behind his door, and used a loudspeaker. Hands out the window, he ordered, like I was already a threat. I did it. My hands shook. I tried to speak, tried to explain I was a tourist, that I didn't understand. He shouted for me to be quiet. He approached with his weapon raised, close enough that the barrel felt like a physical presence. Then more cars arrived. Then I was yanked out of the vehicle, forced down, cuffed, and driven to a station so fast I didn't even process where we were going. In the holding cell, I sat on a concrete bench feeling like my life had been rerouted into something I couldn't escape. Officers outside the bars spoke in sharp bursts. I caught words that made no sense in context: murderer, violator, hurt children. One officer walked past and stared at me like he recognized my face. "That's him," he said quietly. I laughed once, a short involuntary sound, because it was so absurd. Then nobody laughed back. Hours passed. My requests to contact the embassy were ignored or mocked. The anxiety turned into something physical, my hands sweating cold, my stomach cramping, my throat tight like it was trying to swallow my heart. Then, suddenly, someone unlocked the cell. A different officer stood there looking uncomfortable. He said, "Mistake." Just that. I was released into the afternoon sun like I'd been pulled out of a nightmare mid-sentence. They apologized in a way that sounded rehearsed and completely insufficient. Before I left, they showed me a photo. The man they thought I was. And for a moment my brain couldn't process it, because it looked like looking into a mirror that had been slightly warped. Same height. Same hair. Same face shape. Same eyes. If you glanced quickly, you'd swear it was me. The officer said the man was wanted for something violent and recent, and that they'd been hunting him for weeks. I asked where he was now. The officer just shrugged. I drove the rest of the way to my relatives with my hands locked at 10 and 2, knuckles white, checking mirrors every few seconds. I tried to laugh about it with my family, but the laughter felt thin. My aunt told me, softly, that sometimes people disappear into the hills and then show up wearing different names. A few nights later, I woke up to a sound outside the guest room window. It was so faint I thought it was an animal at first. I lay still, listening. Then I heard it again. A knock. Not on the front door. On glass. 3 taps, slow and deliberate. I sat up and stared at the window. Curtains drawn. Darkness on the other side. I told myself it was branches. Then the tapping repeated, same rhythm, same patience. I got up, walked across the room, and pulled the curtain aside. There was a man standing inches from the glass, face pale in the moonlight. And for half a second, my brain did the worst possible thing. It tried to recognize him as me. He smiled slightly, like he knew exactly what that confusion felt like. Then he lifted a finger to his lips in a shoo gesture. I stumbled back, heart punching my ribs. When I forced myself forward again, he was gone. In the morning, I checked the outside wall beneath the window. No footprints. The ground was dry and dusty, the kind of ground that holds prints like memory. But there was nothing. Later that day, my cousin showed me a local news clip on his phone. A woman had gone missing 2 towns over. The anchor spoke quickly, the way they do when it's serious but they don't want to scare viewers too much. There was a blurry security image attached. A man caught on camera near her house. The same face as the photo the police showed me. And the same face I'd seen outside the window. I left the country early. I told my family it was because of work. Because of timing. Because the trip was too intense. But the real reason was this: I realized the police didn't find me by accident. They found me because, for a short time, I was the easiest version of him to catch. And some nights, even back home, I still wake up expecting to hear 3 taps on the glass. Because if someone can wear your face, then the scariest part isn't being mistaken for a monster. It's wondering how many people looked into that same mirror and never realized the difference. Story 4. The worst day of my life happened on a Sunday, in a coastal town called Harbor Point. It was small enough that people still used landmarks instead of addresses. Turn left by the church, 2 blocks past the feed store, that kind of place. Crime didn't feel real there. Not in a way you could touch. I worked for the county office back then, mostly paperwork, some dispatch support. Quiet job. Quiet town. That Sunday evening, a call came in that didn't sound like our town. Codes for multiple casualties. A man with a weapon. A survivor on the line whispering through pain. For a second, I honestly thought it was a mistake, like someone hit the wrong button. Then I saw everyone moving. We drove in a tight line toward the grocery store on the north end of town. It was closed for the night. Lights off. Glass windows across the front. And right away we saw the blood. A trail, dark and smeared, leading from the back of the store toward the front. We forced our way inside and found a man on the floor near the entrance, still holding a phone like he'd been born with it in his hand. He'd crawled across the entire store to call for help. We cleared aisles one by one. The building felt wrong, too quiet, too still, like it was holding its breath. In the back, we found the rest. Some people didn't make it. 2 did, barely. Another man stood there uninjured but covered in someone else's blood. He kept repeating, he said he'd let me live, like it was the only sentence his brain could carry. The story came out in pieces. A person had hidden in the store before closing. After the staff locked up, he stepped out, weapon drawn. He herded everyone into the back, bound them with whatever he could find, and stacked them in pairs on the floor like objects. Someone asked why. The attacker said something like, "I'm sorry," the way people say it when they've already decided they're not stopping. Then he did what he did. But the part that never made sense, never, was that he left one person alive on purpose. Not by mistake. Not because he ran out of time. He told him directly, "I'm letting you live." When we investigated, we hit walls immediately. Cameras not working. Repair scheduled next week. No useful prints. A few distant sightings of a sedan that went nowhere. A sketch that looked like everyone and no one at the same time. People treated it like a storm. Like something that blew through and couldn't be fought. But I couldn't accept that. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I wanted logic. I kept coming back to the survivor. The one left alive. Eventually, months later, I sat with him in a small interview room and asked him the question nobody wanted to ask. Why do you think he let you live? The man stared at his hands for a long time. Then he said, because I promised. Promised what? His throat bobbed. That I'd tell the story exactly the way he wanted it told. That was when the air in the room changed. I asked what he meant. He said the attacker leaned down close and whispered a name into his ear before leaving. A name the man had never heard before. Then the attacker said, if they ask, you didn't see my face. If they ask, you never heard my voice. And if you break that promise, I'll come back and finish the job. I asked him why he didn't say this sooner. He looked at me like I was the one being naive. Then he slid a photo across the table. It was taken through his kitchen window at night. A man standing in the yard. Not moving. Just looking. The survivor's house was 30 miles from the grocery store. The photo was time-stamped 2 days after the attack. The man said, that's why. We never caught the attacker. I eventually left that job. People in town still speak about it carefully, like saying it too loudly might bring it back. But the detail that still keeps me up isn't the violence. It's the intention. Because storms don't choose a single person to leave alive. Storms don't ask for a promise. And storms don't come back later to check if you kept your mouth shut. Story 5. I grew up around a community that kept to itself. Not isolated like a movie, but separate in a way you can feel when you're a kid and you don't have the words for it yet. Everyone had rules. Everyone had routines. Everyone knew what belonged and what didn't. And then one ordinary day, something walked in from the outside and proved how fragile ordinary really is. I won't go into graphic details. I don't think you need them to understand the fear. The fear was enough on its own. That morning started like any other. Work. Chores. Silence broken only by familiar sounds. Then my younger brother came running home from school when he shouldn't have been home. He was crying so hard he couldn't speak at first. When he finally got the words out, he said there was a man in the classroom with a weapon. And then he said something else that made my father's face drain of color. He said the man had brought supplies. Not the kind you bring to rob a place. The kind you bring to build something. My father ran toward the school. I stayed behind because someone had to. The hours that followed felt unreal, like time had turned into thick syrup. When my father returned, he looked older. He told us what happened. The man showed up with a polite question, some small harmless excuse to get inside. Then he came back different. Then the room became a cage. People outside could hear what was happening. Imagine being close enough to hear, but not close enough to stop it. Imagine hearing sounds you'll never unhear, and knowing the distance between you and the door is measured in seconds you don't have. Afterward, the community did something that confused me as much as it shocked me. They forgave. They forgave quickly. Publicly. With speeches and prayers. They supported the attacker's family. They attended funerals. They spoke about letting go of anger like anger was the real danger. And I understand the instinct to keep your heart from rotting. But I also know what it felt like to watch people treat prevention like it was optional. It's in higher hands now, they said. And maybe it is. But that doesn't change the fact that evil used a simple excuse to get through a door, and nobody knew how to say no until it was too late. I left not long after. Not because I stopped loving where I grew up, but because I realized something about myself. I couldn't forgive in the way they could. And I couldn't pretend that forgiveness alone makes the world safe. It's been years, and I still think about how the man got inside so easily. Because the scariest part wasn't that he was evil. It's that he understood something about people that I didn't back then. If you approach the right place with the right tone, you don't need to break down the door. Sometimes, all you have to do is knock.